So when you have to match these graphs, so one thing you might want to do is check out some actual points on these functions. Like let's take cotangent of x, for example. You could plug in 0 and think about what that value should be. Remember, cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent. Tangent is sine over cosine. So cotangent is sorry, this should be a 0 because we're plugging in. So cotangent is cosine of 0 over sine of 0. Let's see if we can compute that. Cosine of 0, that means 0 degrees on the unit circle. So cosine is the x coordinate on the unit circle. This is where 0 degrees is. That's 1 comma 0. Cosine is the x coordinate. So this is 1 over, and by the same logic, sine is the y coordinates, or you can just use your calculator. Sine of 0 is 0. So this is undefined. So at x equals 0, we should expect to find a vertical asymptote. It's like that divide by 0 error that we talked about. So for cotangent of x, we have a vertical asymptote at x equals 0 here. So this might be cotangent of x, this first graph. The second graph also has a vertical asymptote at x equals 0, so we can't eliminate the second graph. We can eliminate this bottom left graph because that doesn't have a vertical asymptote. It has a definite point at x equals 0, right? Which we did not get. And then this one also at x equals 0, it says y is supposed to be about 0. So it's got to be one of these two up top. We've narrowed it down. We plugged in 0 in for cotangent of x. We got out undefined, which means it's got a vertical asymptote at x equals 0. So let's try out another value. If we're trying to guess between these two graphs, like this graph, at pi over 2, it's supposed to spit out 1 for y. So let's try that. For cotangent of x, let's plug in pi over 2. So that's going to be cosine pi over 2 divided by sine pi over 2. And cosine pi over 2 is 0. Sine pi over 2 is 1. So this gives us 0. This one isn't undefined. This gives us 0. So at pi over 2, on the x-axis, when we plug in pi over 2, we're supposed to get out 0 for the y-axis. So pi over 2, this is 1 for the y value, so that's not our choice. Pi over 2, 0. This one matches up. So by process of elimination, we knew it had to be one of these two. And I just found out that graph number 2 is supposed to correspond with cotangent of x. Okay, so I'll do one more here. Yeah, you'll just want to keep doing the same thing. Plug in some values, some actual points, and see what it spits out. Like for cosecant of x, let me do this in a little bit more of a table fashion to keep it organized. If you plug in 0 for cosecant of x, remember cosecant is just 1 over sine. Sorry, so if we plug in 0 in for x, then sine of 0 is 0, and so this is undefined. So for cosecant of x, I plug in x equals 0, I get undefined for f of x. So that's another vertical asymptote. And we already know that this one was supposed to be cotangent of x. The only other vertical asymptote at x equals 0 was this graph here. So you should feel pretty confident that this has to be our answer because there's no other vertical asymptotes. Could plug in another point. Let's plug in pi over 2. Cosecant of pi over 2, that's the same thing as 1 over sine of pi over 2. And sine of pi over 2 is 1 in your calculator. And 1 divided by 1 makes 1. So if we go pi over 2 in the x, we're supposed to get out 1 on the y. And that checks out with our choice, right? Because pi over 2 in the x, 1 on the y. So this is cosecant x. Do the same thing for secant and for tangent. Plug in a value for x, see what it spits out for y. That needs to be a point on your graph, just like that last point that we just found.